Welcome to 8th grade Social Studies Star Prep and the 7-Minute Mastery Series. Today we're going to be talking about a changing nation, the young American country changing in front of us. Native Americans. So the Indian Removal Act, 1830, it was signed by President Andrew Jackson, essentially giving the federal government the legal right to remove the Indians from their native lands and basically ship them over to the Oklahoma Territory. This was done in pursuit of taking of the Indian lands for natural resources. They wanted the lands for their own development, for natural resources in the area. These usually were like the Georgia, Florida areas, mostly where they came from. This led to the eventual journey of these Indians forcibly by military force. And they called this journey the Trail of Tears, which was the infamous journey the Native Americans were forced to take, led by military forces from their homelands to reservations west of the Mississippi, essentially going to Oklahoma Territory. Many of these Native Americans died on the trip. Worcester versus Georgia, the Supreme Court said that Georgia and any state had no right to intervene with Indians as they were their own nations. So the Indians were their own individual nations, and only the federal government had the right to deal with them. There's a lot of backstory here, but as long as we have that idea, then we'll know that Andrew Jackson completely subverted the Supreme Court decision when he forced the natives to leave their land. The Dawes Act. This happened many years later. This is actually after the Civil War. It allowed the president to survey Indian lands and divide and allot it to different individual Indians, apart from the tribes as a whole. So this sounds like maybe it's a good idea. You know, it gives the Indians a chance to have their own land. No, what this is doing is trying to split up the Indians from being individual nations to individual people so that they can assimilate these Indians. Assimilate just means make them like the surrounding culture, which was the whole goal and point of this was, again, to destroy Indian culture and assimilate them into the culture of the surrounding peoples. So industrialization during this changing nation time, beginning in the late 1700s, mills and factories began to spring up throughout the northern states. Originally, these ideas were brought over from Great Britain. So it was kind of a slow growth at first. We'll get into what really increased that growth later. The northern states were a good place for industry because they had fast-flowing rivers. You see on the upper right and the lower right, actually, that there's mills here that are turned when the water flows, and this can generate power. And these fast-flowing rivers were obviously good for transportation because they had fewer large farms than the South, so they were more capable of doing other things. So there wasn't farming as much, but there was more industry. Some places like Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and other places in the North very soon became widely known for their industry. More industrialization. So the cotton gin was invented by Eli Whitney, again in the late 1700s, 1793, and this greatly increased the speed at which these little seeds within the cotton were removed. So instead of one slave picking out the seeds from the cotton and getting 1 pound a day, you could get possibly 100 pounds a day from this machine or more. And so what this did is that you need to know this for the test. The cotton gin actually increased the demand for slaves because now Southerners wanted more slaves to pick more cotton because the gin could produce more of it. This also increased the cotton mills and textile mills in the northern states because more cotton could be produced faster in the South. So now you could spin that cotton into cloth if you had more mills in the north. So it's kind of a situation where it goes back and forth here. With large groups of immigrants entering the country, labor was cheap in the north, and slaves, they were obviously cheap labor in the south because they weren't paid, they were slaves. So this U.S. economy began to grow quickly. Let's talk about what pushed the U.S. economy forward. So the War of 1812. British eventually invaded the U.S., getting as far as Washington, D.C. before burning the White House. But historically, this war has really very little political consequence. No land was exchanged when it was all said and done. Andrew Jackson became a war hero in a battle he fought in New Orleans because of this. But really, there's not a lot of significance, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. One of the most significant consequences of this war, though, was the growth of U.S. industry. Prior to the war, almost all manufactured goods came from England. But during the war with the British, we can't get those goods from England because they stopped trading with us. They're at war with us. So what that did is that forced the United States to start producing some of their own manufacturing. So actually the war in the long term helped US industry because it forced the Americans to have their own industry because they couldn't trade with Great Britain anymore. So if you see that on the test, which I've seen it a couple times, any question we've seen so far about the War of 1812 is about that industry growing. Okay, places like Lowell Mills, Massachusetts became massive industry locations producing before unheard of quantities of goods in these locations. Okay, we'll talk later about some of the work conditions there. All right, let's get to our practice questions. As always, when I read the question, you press pause and then find your answer, then press play, and let's find out if your answer is correct. Which shaded state was the main destination of American Indians relocated or forced to relocate as part of the Trail of Tears? Press pause. Here's your answer. Yep, that is the shaded area is the state of Oklahoma now. It was at the time Oklahoma Territory. I see no reason why Indians who can give satisfactory proof of having by their own labor supported their families for a number of years and who are willing to detach themselves from tribal relations should not be admitted to the benefit of the Homestead Act. That's Rutherford B. Hayes. In this excerpt, President Hayes proposes a change in federal policy towards American Indians. Legislation based on this new policy did which of the following? Press pause. Here's your answer. Promoted individual land ownership among American Indians. So this makes it sound like it's a good deal. It really wasn't, right? We know that. It promoted individual land ownership, but it was splitting them up, trying to dissolve their nations. How did the War of 1812 most affect the U.S. economy? Press pause. Here's your answer. Disruption in trade ended up contributing to the domestic industrial growth. Domestic just means on the homeland, right? So the war, because we couldn't trade, we started producing things on our own. Industry grew. How did advancements in industrial technologies affect businesses during the late 19th century? Remember, the 19th century is the 1800s, by the way. Press pause. Here's your answer. By improving production methods and increasing competition. Which of these occurred during early U.S. industrialization? Press pause. Here's your answer. Production of goods transitioned from homes to factories. That's the early part of industrialization. People were producing things in their home. Now they're producing them in factories. All right, that's it for this lesson. Thanks for watching. Thanks for participating. As always, watch the rest of the videos. Take notes. Re-watch these if you need to. Thanks. Bye.